again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good, simple topic today. Let's go for it. What's the strangest or creepiest thing that you've ever found in the woods? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Back when I was 16, I was walking in a heavily wooded area near St. Louis, Missouri, a largely undeveloped plot of land that was known for a large population of deer. The snow and ice had been unusually heavy that winter, so as April came around it continued to thaw and rain a lot. Very dreary, overcast days, lots of fallen trees and mud. I noticed one tree had fallen in the middle of the path and didn't focus too much on it till I saw something dangling inches from my face. It was a dead deer, a young buck, hanging from the fallen tree in between the two main branches. The hooves had been dangling inches from my face because of how zoned out I was, not processing anything because of the sense of security I felt in those woods. This was private property, owned by the school I was attending, and hunting was strictly prohibited because there were neighborhoods nearby. More importantly, who walked hundreds of acres into the woods and hung the carcass up in that way in the middle of a rainstorm? School sent its security out. They figured it was illegal bow hunting, but the deer was never recovered. So at first they didn't believe my story until weeks later, when several female deer were found laying in a nearby open field, all sprawled out in bizarre poses, clearly manipulated after they died. No signs of post-mortem cuts, scavenging from coyotes, or decay. Also, too far away from the road to be roadkill, but could have been an attempt by someone to hide that they were hunting without license or permission. Still very strange, and I haven't seen anything like it since, and I live in Florida, where weird stuff happens all the time in the national parks and wetlands. I grew up in rural Michigan, and my family is really effed up, so from a young age I was exposed to animal cruelty and became pretty desensitized to animal remains, natural deaths. I was and am a die-hard animal lover, but the facts of life came early, I guess. Edited to add, I was not easily shook by the real-life gore, y'all. That's the point I'm making. I once thought I was a young teen. I was out hiking on private property, and something happened that made me feel very unsafe. I had never had a problem in the area, been going that way since I was 7 to 9. Never saw anyone else, totally overgrown. There was a little stand of cedars, though, where I would sit and read. On this hike, I remember it was fall. It was an overcast day, and I was already upset about something. I was walking on autopilot, over one fence, around another, follow the third corn row, push through the bushes, and there's a footpath. Totally trespassing. So, I'm like 10 to 13, and mad as hell and not paying attention, and when I burst through the underbrush onto the usual deer trail, I see a huge figure looming in the path. I saw stars. My body lit up, and I hightailed it probably a solid 20 yards before I realized I didn't hear anything behind me. I slowed to a stop and waited. Dead silence. I moved off the path into the bushes and very slowly snuck back around to the spot I had been, and saw what had startled me. Someone had basically made a scarecrow out of a deer's carcass. The massive skull was not cleaned, but not fresh. It had huge antlers, and the spine was attached to the skull. You know what I mean. I remember thinking no hunter would leave that skull behind, and the ribs were still attached. It had been cleaned for meat, but the forelegs had been taken and reattached in an unnatural way, and it was wearing a men's shirt. The more I think about this, I'm pretty sure it was wearing a pair of old glasses with the lenses pushed out, and swaying gently in the golden, late fall sun. It was attached to a tree in such a way that it was the middle of the narrow path. It was a scarecrow, for me. It struck me that some sick-ass F had taken a lot of time making this abomination, and probably because they knew I was trespassing. My family motto had always been it's only trespassing if you get caught. As a functional adult, I realize how effed up that sounds. I learned my lesson about trespassing, though. I stayed the F out of the woods after that. People got weird about what they imagined they were allowed to do if you're on their property. By the time you get caught, it could be too late. I found a washing machine drum full of animal body parts from all sorts of small animals. filled to the top with gore ranging from old bones to still pretty fresh, and it had a few spots around it where there were melted red wax on the ground left from a ring of candles about 10 feet around. This was in Northern California by the Oregon border, pretty far out in the woods on a dirt road. Tame compared to some of the stories here, but when I was maybe 8 or 9, I was playing in a creek near my friend's house on the outskirts of town. Something caught my eye in the water, and I reached in, pulling up the cracked face of an old doll, its glass eyes still partially intact and rolling around the sockets, 100% scarier than the various dead animals we stumbled across over the years.
Creepy dolls, in the context of where they belong, are creepy enough, but finding one submerged and pulling it out of context would be downright frightening, so yeah, that's valid.
This happened about 20 years ago while hunting with my dad in northern BC. It was a cold October morning, and it was still dark when we parked the truck and started our hike into a clear cut. I was familiar with the area, and we had moose hunted there before. My dad went left and I went right, and I made my way to the top of a slope to get a better view of the clear cut. I found a stump to sit on and took out my binoculars and quickly found my dad in the clear cut across the mountain. As soon as I spotted him, I heard something heavy move behind me in the forest, roughly 40 yards away. I'm thinking, yes, a moose. I then head towards the forest edge, where I hear a scream or screech unlike I've ever heard. It did not sound human, and wasn't like any animal I've heard before. It was so loud, and I swear my soul left my body for a few seconds. I turned around and ran down that clear-cut hill as fast as my teenage legs would take me. When I got to my dad, he had said he'd heard it too, and found me in his binoculars running down the clear cut, then looked up at the forest edge and said he saw a big, hairy, human-like creature standing about 8 feet tall between 2 birch trees. It stayed for a few seconds, then turned around as way gone. We got in the truck, went home for the day. We asked elders and relatives about it when we got back, and they called them the forest guardians. Still scares the hell out of me. A couple of years ago, I was adventuring out in the country with my friend along a lake here in rural Alberta. We found this gravel road by a landfill to go down, and we followed it to the end. At the end, there was this dope-looking party spot, lots of trails, open space, and a fire pit with a couch and everything. The first time we went, everything was normal. We came back a month later to chill and take some pictures, and that's when it got creepy. The same couch we saw had been burnt up and charred. We found a chair with a hole in the bottom with a bucket underneath acting as a toilet. Can't remember the name for it. Around the chair, we found big animal bones and weird-shaped piles and sculptures. Weird circles made out of bones. We found a half-burned foot in a tree with a melted toothbrush in it. And then 6 or 7 toothbrushes under the ground, at least 12 pairs of panties hanging in a bush, and another few pairs on the ground. Baggies of long-gone powdered drugs, prescription bottles, diapers, everywhere. A small pontoon boat, a satellite dish, trash on the ground, also everywhere. Bottles and cans stacked up. We found 4 5-gallon water jugs filled to the brim with foul chemicals. We stayed away from those, lol. I'm assuming they were for the residues left over from the meth-making process, as I've heard stories about people out here just chucking them in the bush, but I'm not 100%. Found a couple nasty-ass sex toys, condoms everywhere, classic party objects. We decided to stay away for a while after that because it scared us, but we were so curious as to what was going on that 3 months later, we went back. Everything was cleaned up, except there were now more 5-gallon water bottles full of chemicals and a paddle boat. We walked down the path for a minute or two until we heard the sound of a truck turning over from just down the way that we were heading. We didn't know at first what the sound was and just stopped and listened, but it was 1000% a truck trying to start. Way too close for comfort. Obviously, they needed to get their vehicle fixed, but we ran the hell away back to the car and haven't been back there since. I was out at my parents' place shooting on the old range. After we were done, my friends went off to take a leak behind some bushes. After he was done, he called out, "Hey, come here, you gotta see this." I walked in and saw what he was looking at. It looked like a canvas butcher's apron hung from a tree branch to form a kind of pouch, about 4 feet off the ground. There were bloodstains on it. When we looked closer, we noticed it had 4 or 5 deer legs in it. They'd been cut off right around the knee. This was on private land, pretty far from any of the neighbors, and in a place where none of them would have had a line of sight to it. In order for them to be hung there, someone would have to hike from the nearest crossroad, about 400 to 500 yards of open fields, without being observed by any of the neighbors on the way into the woods. We called the police, and a deputy sheriff stopped out to look at the pictures I took and take a statement, then said it was probably coyote hunters. He didn't seem too interested in the fact that none of them would have permission to hunt there. 20 years later, and we never found out who did it. This was a couple decades before trail cameras were popular and affordable. We live on a mountain road near a national forest. I like to drive up the mountain sometimes to clear my head. Very few people live above us. Someone has painted runes and other symbols on boulders in the woods by the river that runs by the road from our house to the top of the mountain. It feels wrong. There's no need for anyone to go up there who doesn't live there. It gave me a chill, and I haven't been back up our road since. I was exploring a wooded area near Chadsford, Pennsylvania, a region with history and structures from as far back as the Revolutionary War. The area was once miles of farmland in every direction, and much of it returned to woods by the 1980s and 90s. When I was growing up there, I would often find artifacts deep in the woods and some remains of ancient structures like old homes and barns claimed by the woods. I found the rusted remains of a rifle once and a number of metal spherical baubles. They looked kind of like Christmas tree ornaments, but were rather thick metal. There were networks of streams throughout a particular forest that I loved to explore. Most of the streams would terminate into impenetrable brush, which would dissuade me from pressing further. But I eventually found my way through and into a place with much larger, older trees. The stream ended at a broad pipe, rusted and flaking away, driven through a hill. On the other side of the hill, I found an artificial lake, oval in shape, with steps leading into it at one end. It seemed to have been made of an old style of cinder block. I suspect that this place was once an old swimming pool, but it was much larger than a modern pool. It was in the middle of nowhere, and I never found the remains of any other structure within a reasonable distance of this pool. As a 10-year-old, we called this place the Lake of the Dead, obviously.
I'm actually a pretty big fan of Chadsford, Pennsylvania. Good history for the American Revolution, great battlefield, good museum, nice place, and a really good Christmas tour as well. So if you like that stuff, enjoy it, and I'd love to find this pool.
I was the creepiest thing that someone else found in the woods. Firstly, the story I'm about to tell wasn't creepy from my perspective. In fact, I was having the time of my life. However, for the people who found me in this state, I can only imagine how horrified they were, LMAO. I'm lucky I didn't get shot. It all started when I took 3 hits of LSD after work around 10 p.m. It was Friday night, and my weekend had just begun. Normally, I would trip during the day and take nature walks for hours. However, it was nighttime, so I was hesitant at first. I was chilling in the house listening to music for a while, but I started feeling adventurous. So I decided to take a midnight hike through the woods with no electronics. Oh boy. Keep in mind, I live in a very rural region on 85 acres of land that belongs to my family, most of which is woodlands. A national wildlife refuge with thousands of acres borders my property. I wasn't worried at all because I know this land like the back of my hand, but I never walked it at nighttime on acid before. So I grabbed a tapestry to lay on, a pillow, some snack cakes, and a few joints for my journey, then began walking through the woods. I walked for a good 45 minutes or so, found a nice break in the trees where I could see the stars, and decided to set up camp. I laid down on my tapestry, looking up at the stars, and smoked a joint, while tripping balls and laughing hysterically at absolutely nothing. Everything was fine for a few hours, until I decided to make my way back home. So I started walking, and walking, and walking some more. I must have walked for a good hour. I soon realized that I was not walking in the right direction, LMAO. So I turned around at 180 degrees and started walking the exact opposite way. I was not going the right way at all. I soon decided that I was just going to spend the night in the woods and find my way in the daylight. So I laid my tapestry back down and went back to gazing at the stars. I wasn't freaking out at all. I just ate my snack cakes, smoked a joint, and enjoyed my trip. I was just in my own world, gazing at the stars and laughing at the situation that I'd found myself in. However, after a while, I started hearing the sound of ruffling leaves in the background. I assumed it was just animals, so I just laid there calmly laughing because I was on psychedelics and couldn't help myself, lol. Then the voices started. I could hear people talking in the distance, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I tried to be quiet, but the harder I tried, the more I laughed. Eventually, I started seeing a flashlight scanning through the woods, and for some reason, this just made me laugh even harder. I was laughing like a maniac now. Soon enough, the voices got close enough to kind of make out what they were saying. They were asking themselves, "What the F is that? It sounds like someone's laughing." I tried to muffle my voice with my pillow, but I couldn't control my laughter to save my life. The voices just kept getting closer and closer, but I was laughing like an 8-year-old hiding in a game of hide and seek. Then their flashlights scanned over me a couple of times, but they didn't seem to notice me. They were only like 10 yards away at this point. They soon got very close to me, and I had to announce my presence to not startle them. "Hey," I half-assed said in between breaks of laughter. I was laughing so hard that I could barely get my words out. They freaked the F out, LMAO. One guy said something to the effect of, "I told you it was a person." They still couldn't see me in the darkness. They called out, "Who's there?" and began talking about how weird this was. I tried to tell them that I was just hiking through the woods and got lost, but I was laughing too hard to talk. As I tried to speak, they turned their flashlights directly on me for the first time and started to approach me. They were pretty cool after they calmed down a bit. I actually know one of the guys, lol. They were wondering I was just laughing like a maniac in the woods with no lights. So I confessed to them that I was on acid. They told me that I scared the F out of them. It turns out that I got lost on my property and accidentally hiked the wrong way into the wildlife refuge instead of back towards my house. The guys that found me were there to hunt. I smoked a joint with them and we all laughed about it for a good while. They got a good kick out of me because I was out of my mind tripping. One of them took selfies with me to show their friends, lol. They helped me get back to my house so I didn't have to wait until the morning. I ran into one of the hunters a few months later and perfectly sober, and he told me that he's told everyone this story, but nobody believes him, lol. So again, this story isn't really that creepy from my perspective. However, just imagine walking deep in the woods at night while hunting, and you suddenly hear hysterical laughing. You're scanning the woods with your flashlights, but the echoes of the woods make the sound hard to locate. Then you hear someone say, "Hey," and turn your flashlight to see some long-haired hippie dude covered in leaves grinning ear to ear. This is what I imagine the experience was like for them. I know I would have been creeped out in their position, LMAO.
I love these stories from the other perspective, where you were just existing in a, slightly psychedelic way, and you were the reason other people got scared. So I like the role reversal and the explanation. And sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh, I've got one for this prompt. My father and I were taking a quick hike just a few miles north of Butte, Montana. It's not absolute wilderness that far outside of Butte, but just a few miles outside most towns in Montana means you're way out in the backwoods. It wasn't an unusual day by any means, a warm June afternoon, perfect for a little hike. We were only a mile or so away from where we parked when we saw a large trash bag along the trail. I hate litter bugs, especially out in the woods. I intended to haul it back with us and dispose of it properly. When I attempted to lift the bag, though, it was heavy, much heavier than I had anticipated. Curiosity got the better of my father and me, and we split open the bag to see what was inside. I was expecting a dead animal of some sort. It's not totally unusual for someone to dispose of a dead dog or cat in this fashion in this part of the world. Some people out here will poach deer and leave the trimmings like this too. Upon opening the bag, we saw a boot, and then socks, and then pants. We then realized they were all attached to human legs. It looked so unreal, like a movie prop, like someone took a saw and cut off a store dummy's leg at the groin. This had to be some sort of prank, right? It wasn't. I fell backwards and started having a panic attack. Nothing prepares you for something like that. My dad, on the other hand, sprung into action. He immediately closed the bag back up as best he could, and then started to slowly survey our surroundings. That freaked me out even more. Through my gasps, I asked him what he was looking for. All he said was, "Might be someone watching us." Can you imagine stumbling upon a serial killer's dump site and they're at a distance watching you? That really didn't help my panic. As I tried to calm down, my dad called the Silver Bow County Sheriff and reported what we found. Limp-legged, we hiked back to the mile or so the road, and waited for the cops to show up. The authorities searched the area with cadaver dogs for a week and never found any other pieces of the body or even a scent trail to follow. The sheriff's people even searched our trucks and interviewed us to see if we might have been responsible. Nothing ever came of the whole incident. No one single thing. It's been just over 10 years, and nobody has any idea who the legs belong to or how they got there. No missing persons report that matched up, and DNA from the legs never showed up on any databases. Butte, Montana has a reputation for being a bit of a rough side, so it's not impossible the guy was a local who ran into trouble. But why wouldn't his family or friends report him missing? Surely someone would notice he was gone, or at least legless? I don't think we'll ever know the truth, but someone out there knows what happens, and they aren't too eager to give us the whole story. TLDR, a pair of human legs in a trash bag.